This is your last chance. After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill, and the video ends. You're back on the YouTube homepage, clicking on a Mr. Beast video. 100 people are fighting to the death, gladiator style, for the chance to have their medical debt paid off. It's hilarious. Or, you take the red pill, and you stay here in the trenches with me, and I show you just how deep the manipulation, propaganda, and consumption hole goes.
Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about how our primary role in society became the consumer. Picture this. You're watching ESPN when suddenly you notice that 2/3 of the screen has become an advertisement. You get annoyed, so you put on a Twitch stream where you have to sit through 1 minute and 30 seconds of ads before getting to the stream. You bail and head to TikTok where you're served an ad for a mascara that promises telescopic lashes. You don't know what it means, but it sounds awesome. With just one click, you bought it. Now you head over to Instagram where you're served an ad for the thing you just said out loud you wanted 30 seconds ago. You step outside to clear your head where you're bombarded with billboards, flyers, and ads on the benches at the bus stop. People say you can't leave your house in New York City without spending $30, and after 3 years of living here, I can confirm that is a fact. But how did we get here? And most importantly, what the fuck? Oi, it's the 1900s and things ain't been the same and I don't like it one bit. Our roles in society changed a lot from the Stone Age to the Industrial Revolution. We went from having no leisure time and spending all of our time just focused on survival to forming primitive societies where our free time was spent creating art or contributing to the enrichment of the community, to a fully fledged modern society where we have much more free time, much more wealth, and much more goods and services available to us. The first Industrial Revolution took place in Great Britain from about 1760 to 1830. They knew they had a global advantage with their newfound technology, so they tried to block the spread, but it couldn't be contained for long. In the US, the Industrial Revolution took place from about 1876 to about 1900. During this time, we see groundbreaking changes in technology, culture, and socioeconomics. So, all of a sudden, we have this new capacity for the mass production of goods, we have this redistribution of wealth, which created this new middle class with a spending power that they never had before, and now we see these densely populated urban cities as people are moving closer to these factories that are providing a ton of jobs. Over the course of 100 years, we see New York City go from looking like this to looking like this. In just 100 years. From this to this, okay? For almost 2 million years, humans and early humans existed as hunter-gatherers. Our day-to-day lives revolved around finding food, finding shelter, and staying alive. In just a few thousand years, we created primitive societies that eventually grew into more advanced and spectacular societies like the Roman Empire. In less than 100 years, science and technology allowed us to create a society that would be completely unrecognizable to our predecessors. Before we really dive into this major cultural shift, let's define some terms. So, what is consumerism? Consumerism is an economic theory that was developed in the early 1900s that basically says that the excessive consumption of goods is good for the economy. So what is consumption culture? I think the best way to describe consumption culture is with this quote from Victor Labow from 1955. He says, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek out spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate." So the Industrial Revolution is taking place in the US from about 1876 to about 1900, and one of the most notable inventions from this time is the assembly line, which is powered by fossil fuels. Nice. This allows for increased production, and at the turn of the century, we see the emergence of huge shopping malls and mail-order shopping. Previously, lower-income populations would get by on the bare minimum of necessities. Shopping was a luxury for the upper middle class and the wealthy, but with major shifts in wealth distribution, greater availability of goods, and lower prices, this is now an activity that everyone can participate in. More or less. In the late 1920s, economists became concerned that production would far exceed consumption. Their mission? To shape average Americans into consumers. At the end of World War II, consumption in 1920 compared to 1860 had increased by a factor of 12, while the population had only increased by a factor of 3. Consumption economists embraced the new economic gospel of consumption, which encouraged average Americans to constantly be striving for a higher standard of living and to place more value on the acquisition of goods than on the value of free time. Their new goal was to create desire. They had to anticipate consumers' wants and needs or create new problems so that they could solve them. Unsurprisingly, this is also a response for demands for a shorter work week. If workers work less, then they'll produce less, and in turn they'll make less money, so they'll consume less. They might do something dangerous like spend time with their family, or travel, or develop hobbies that aren't based on monetary gain. How do they achieve this paradigm shift? With advertisements and propaganda. I'm going to circle back to this, but in 1921 we see the invention of the commercial radio. What better way to inject your message into every household than the airwaves? What other new amazing things do they want to sell people? Well, first, I don't know if you've ever heard of a little something I like to call electricity. Yeah. Households with electricity increased from 35% to 68% between 1921 to 1929, which means consumers can now be sold products that use electricity. During that same time, motor vehicle registration increased from 8 million to 28 million. And the introduction of buying on credit allowed individuals to worry about all those pesky bills later when they had it all figured out. Except, they didn't have it all figured out. With all this unbridled spending on credit, the debt reached over 200% of the GDP. The economy collapsed, and the culture of mass consumption came to a screeching halt for the next 20 years. Dun dun dun. But do not fear. After World War II, people were again ready to purchase. After 2 decades of having gone without, they were ready to go with. And with the introduction of the television, it's now easier than ever to get every single eye and ear on your product. Between 1950 to 1990, consumption per capita doubles. That's all really cool and interesting, I know, but that just tells the story of the what, not the how. I wanted to really dive into how our perspective and lifestyle habits changed so drastically, so I did something I'm not proud of. I read a book. Okay, I read 2 books, in fact. Okay, I skimmed 2 books. The first book I read is this book called Propaganda. It was written by Edward Bernays in the 1920s, and the purpose of this book was to define this really niche term called propaganda and to explain how it could be used to influence the minds of consumers. Pretty cool, right? He defines modern propaganda as a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relation of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. Basically, changing public opinion. Here's an example of how propaganda was used to influence fashion. So in the early 1900s, velvet manufacturers realized, okay, the velvet market in the US is completely dead, it's impossible to revive. So what do? They take it to a market where they can revive it, which is ideally Paris, but more specifically, Lyons, France, because Lyons is the home of silk manufacturers. So they take the velvet directly to these upscale silk manufacturers like Lanvin, and they sell them on the benefits of using velvet in their work. Then they arrange for countesses and duchesses to wear velvet, and then finally, when they present the American people with velvet again, it's widely accepted because, of course, it's in fashion.
And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when, in fact, you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room.
This is a really interesting case study on how marketers and manufacturers can use these obscure back channels to manipulate public opinion. He then goes on to explain the psychology of public relations. He says that people think differently when they're in a group. He implores his readers to study the group mind because if they can understand the inner mechanisms of the group mind, then they can control the masses and regiment their behavior without their knowing it. Wow, what an amazing playbook on manipulation. I'm sure no one would ever use these concepts for ill will. He lays out the blueprint for social influence by explaining that the group mind does not think. It has impulses, habits, and emotions. Its first impulse is to follow the example of a trusted leader. In the absence of a trusted leader, it does so by means of cliches, pat words, or images which stand for a whole group of ideas or experiences. Basically what he's saying here is that when we are engaging in this groupthink behavior, we're not using our rational mind. We're either following the example of a trusted leader, or we are following the example of existing stereotypes. Good. So, who are the trusted leaders when it comes to fashion, for example? Celebrities and influencers. Of course, H&M is clamoring to get their grubby little fingers on a Charlie XCX collab because what's more brat than greenwashing? Hello, it's green. When Fashion Nova came out, it was Cardi B and Kylie Jenner promoting it. And what is the purpose of the Victoria's Secret fashion show? Of course, it's to sell lingerie, but more than that, it's to convince you that in buying Victoria's Secret lingerie, you will elevate yourself to the status of angel. He explains that the reason that power tends to concentrate in the hands of the few and the wealthy is because it is incredibly expensive to manipulate the social machinery. To advertise on a scale to reach the masses is expensive, so to reach the people who influence the masses is similarly expensive. Overall, his opinion is that propaganda can be used as a tool of social good. He cites the women's suffrage movement and other social movements as examples of when the opinions of the masses were influenced by a trusted leader, but he naively doesn't take into account how having this amount of power concentrated in the hands of the few and the wealthy could have consequences for the general public, who are not really fairly represented by this population. God, I love men in STEM. Now just hang on a bit longer, I promise it's worth it, as we dive into The Waste Makers by Vance Packard. This book was published in 1960 and it takes a very different approach from Edward Bernay's propaganda. This book focuses on the downsides of mass production and marketing. He starts by explaining the problem, which is that no major innovations came about in the 1950s, only minor improvements to existing products. The radio, fridge, and washing machine are all from the 1920s, and home air conditioning and TV come from the 1940s. So we have no great wealth of new products being created that people need to purchase, but we have this teensy little problem, which is that the economy is depending on every single consumer and the government to spend more each year than they did the previous year. This is because we are producing far, far more than we can consume, and because we are becoming more efficient in our production every year, which also takes away jobs from consumers, which means they can spend less money on consumption. Do you see the problem here? So when the recession hits in 1957, Eisenhower advises that the way to end the recession is to simply buy. Buy what? Anything. Businesses obviously ran with this and started pumping out slogans all over the US that looked like, "You auto buy now. Buy now, the job you save may be your own. Buy and be happy. Buy, 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 it's your patriotic duty. And buy your way to prosperity." So we've got the president and all these businesses telling us to buy, but there's only so much you can buy, right? So what did marketers do? They started positioning things that would have been previously deemed luxuries and excesses as necessities. Now you need a phone in every room of your house. You need a large car and a small car. You need a new pair of glasses to match every outfit. And Revlon even brags that during this time they taught women to match their nail enamel to their outfits' smooths and occasions so that they could sell more nail polish. Okay, so that covers increasing sales by buying more of the same products that you already had. But that can only work for certain industries. In others, they implemented what Packard calls progress through the throwaway spirit. Yes, this is the advent of single-use items. Canned whipped cream, disposable razors, even single-wear clothing. Foreshadowing. If they could figure out how to make it and break it in one use, they did. And if they couldn't, they got creative. One company that sold potato peelers decided to sell them in the same color as the peels, so that when you finish peeling your potato and you tossed out the peels, you would also accidentally throw out the peelers because people are just getting too much damn use out of those potato peelers. Say the word peel again. Peel, peel, peel. Asking people to buy more and making single-use items is child's play. It's time to get serious. This is planned obsolescence. It's not a new concept at this time, but it definitely picked up in popularity. People throw around this word planned obsolescence a lot, but what does it really mean? Planned obsolescence is when the inevitable uselessness or becoming obsolete is built into the product's life cycle. It's planned for. These products are not made to last you forever. Is that because they can't make them to last forever? Well, no. But what kind of business model would that be? Packard describes 3 forms of planned obsolescence that companies take advantage of. Obsolescence of function is when an existing product is replaced by a better version of the same product. Think like an iPhone 4 versus an iPhone 10. Obsolescence of quality is when the product physically breaks down, usually after not much use. Think you rip your pants, you crack your phone screen, you flatten the bristles on your toothbrush. And obsolescence of desirability is when the product is still perfectly functional, but we no longer see the value in it. Like with fashion trends. There's nothing wrong with those 5 pairs of skinny jeans in your closet, but you're still not going to wear them. Or this is like upgrading your iPhone 14 for an iPhone 15. There's nothing wrong with the one you already have, and they're really not that different, but it's lost its perceived value. This idea of designing products to be collected or replaced quickly became the ethos of almost every company. An article published in 1936 titled, "If merchandise does not wear out faster, factories will be idle, people unemployed," captures the general sentiment that it is our sworn duty to consume, and consume more, or else it'll be our own fault when the economy collapses. Okay, I guess I read 3 books, but this one was for pleasure. If you think the Dharma Bums has any capacity to be pleasurable, I'm not so sure. Anyway, in Jack Kerouac's 1958 novel, he discusses his vision for the future. A world full of Dharma Bums, refusing to subscribe to the general demand that they consume production and therefore have to work for the privilege of consuming. All the crap they didn't really want anyway. All of them imprisoned in a system of work, produce, consume. Work, produce, consume. One thing that becomes abundantly clear to me after doing my reading is that no matter how much we step our consumption up, and we have, it will never be enough. There are so many industries that are impacted by consumption culture: the tech industry, the beauty industry. God, there's so much I could say about the beauty industry, but I'm going to be focusing on the fashion industry as it's something that's really important to me. I think the trends we see in the fashion industry can be applied to other industries as well. These are just evergreen ways to get people to step their consumption up. So what is fast fashion? You've probably heard this term before and you probably already know what it means, but basically fast fashion is clothing designed to follow trends. It's cheaply made, often low quality, and designed to have a short shelf life. They utilize cheap labor and cheap materials by making clothing in factories in bulk. They rely on offshoring, which is using facilities in countries with lower minimum wages and less strict labor laws, which promotes unethical labor practices and major environmental pollution. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, sign me up! But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. These companies can actually get up to some pretty shady business, but we'll get back to that. But first, how did fast fashion come to be? In 1900, the average yearly household income in the US was about $1,000 annually. Adjusted for inflation in the year 2024, that's about $31,000 annually. And they spent about 20% of their income on apparel. Now, fast forward 125 years, and the average yearly income for just men is $63,000, but we spend only 4% of our income on apparel. In 1930, the average woman owned 9 outfits. Today, we buy 60 new pieces of clothing per year. I'm including this for 2 reasons. One is to show how much cheaper fashion has become. We used to have to save up and buy pieces that we really needed, and they would be made to last as they were expensive, often custom and made on a small scale, most likely by the person you're purchasing from. Now, fashion is all about volume, obtaining as many new pieces as you can and getting rid of them just as quickly. The other reason I mention this is because often when people are arguing in favor of fast fashion, they'll say that fast fashion is good for low-income families. But the truth is that clothing is cheaper than ever and wealth is greater than ever. What low-income families really need is durable, well-made clothing that will last. That H&M sweater that'll fall to pieces after 20 washes is not the answer. Fashion consumption really started to pick up after the Industrial Revolution, and by 1960 we see one of the first really successful fast fashion trends: pulp fashion. In the 1960s, the Scott Paper Company ran a promotion for a new line of colorful paper products. With 2 proofs of purchase and $1.25, you could redeem an offer for a dress made entirely out of paper. The dress was designed to be thrown away after just one wear. This led to a frenzy of women buying the dress. One article I read from Collectors Weekly quoted that 500,000 people purchased the dress. And voila, a trend is born. A trend of easy to make, easy to alter, and cheaply made clothes. They could be quickly and inexpensively customized for any event, any moment in time, as promotional material or as a freebie with a purchase. This was one of our country's first forays into fast fashion, and once we had a taste, we were hungry for more. For a long time, fashion trends would come in 4 seasons. Companies would release a spring, summer, and a fall-winter collection. You could shop only this collection until the next season. This way, trends were much more widespread, and they would last for a full season before they expired. Now we see companies releasing new collections 52 times per year, or once per week. This started when Zara shifted to getting 2 deliveries per week in the early 2000s. Other fast fashion retailers eagerly followed suit, and thus, the micro trend was born. There are so many fast fashion companies that are problematic, but I want to focus on Zara because they're kind of the OG, they're kind of trendsetters. I think it's safe to say they paved the way for Fashion Nova and Shein, which I think is something they can be incredibly proud of. Zara first opened her doors in Spain in 1975. The company started by creating cheaper lookalikes, knockoffs of high-end clothing items. They were a success, and they opened several additional locations before switching their business model in the 1980s to what they called instant fashion. This involved ramping up manufacturing and opening up more factories closer to their retailers so they could supply for trends instantly. Hence, instant fashion. Their first location outside of the US was opened in 1985 in Portugal, which is the same year they were bought by the Spanish retailing giant Inditex. Inditex helped them take their business to the next level, and by 1990 they entered the US and France. Since then, they have dominated the world market. They have locations in Greece, Belgium, Sweden, Israel, Morocco, Estonia, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Australia, just to name a few. As of 2024, they have over 2,000 stores and are in 96 countries. So, how did Zara grow into being the largest fashion retailer ever? Well, with Zara, the general attitude can be simplified too. You know that if you don't buy it right then and there, within 11 days, the entire stock will change. You buy it now or never. And because the prices are so low, you buy it now. Zara does not invest in advertising, they invest in real estate. While luxury brands like Prada and Gucci do everything in their power to distance their brand from fast fashion companies like Zara, Zara does everything in its power to remind you of these luxury brands like Gucci and Prada. This is why Zara spends huge sums of money on prime real estate. For example, it paid $324 million to buy space at 666 Fifth Avenue in New York. According to the company, a building best known for being the most expensive ever sold in Manhattan. Dear God, how can they afford to spend almost $500 million on one retail location? Do not fret for poor sweet Zara. Here is a graph of their parent company Inditex's revenue from 2004 to 2023 in billions of euros. Inditex uses over 1,700 suppliers that employ over 9,000 factories. Although they brag that some of their factories exist in places like Portugal, Morocco, and Turkey with costly labor markets, over half their factories exist in Asia, specifically in China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Bangladesh, countries that are known for their low labor costs. Zara invented this concept of supplying for trends on demand. That means every want, every trend available immediately. This is why they have so many factories. The factory's close proximity to their retailers allows them to supply for trends regionally. If the Spanish market wants red pants and the American market wants leather, they're able to supply for both markets without having to overproduce items for the markets that don't want them. This, of course, inspired other fast fashion companies to pick up the same high production, high turnover model. Thus, instant fashion becomes fast fashion, and Forever 21, H&M, Shein, and Fashion Nova are born. The problem with having 52 micro-seasons, besides the immense environmental impact and the unethical labor practices, is that it prevents us as individuals from developing our own personal sense of style. We just buy 5 new clothing items every month, and we never stop to ask ourselves what we actually like. We end up chasing trends, but never really catching up. It's an endless hamster wheel. The most frustrating thing about it is that fast fashion has poisoned the whole well. Every fashion retailer wants to follow the same model now. I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, that brands that I thought I could rely on 5 to 10 years ago are now putting out utter garbage for the same price. I bought a pair of Converse that have almost completely fallen apart in less than a year, and they're not even the only shoe that I wear. When I was in 5th grade, I bought a pair that lasted me through high school. I tried to buy my fiance a new backpack for Christmas, but all the reviews on the North Face and Patagonia websites were about how much better the old models were and how cheaply made and thoughtless the new designs are. And don't even get me started on how awful Dunks are. They're the thinnest soled shoes ever. It's like buying a pair of flip-flops with a lid that cost $120. It's spiraling out of control because the only way the system works, or the only way we've decided the system works, is if companies continue to make a greater profit every year. And how can they make a greater profit every year when they've already sold everyone a backpack? Export the labor to cheaper countries, use cheaper materials, and design them to break. But before we get into why this is actually bad, if it's not already obvious, I'm going to talk about something that I know everyone is going to get super horny for. Policy. There is likely so much policy that has affected us offshoring the production of goods, but I wanted to see if there was any policy in particular that lined up with my perception of this huge fast fashion boom in the early 2000s, and what I found is that there are a few key policies that seem to tell that story. The first policy we see telling this story is called the Multi-Fiber Arrangement, or the MFA, and existed from 1974 to 1995. This policy was designed to protect the textile industries of developed nations like the US and the EU, and boost production from smaller developing nations like Bangladesh. How did they do this? They put limits on the volume of textiles that developing countries could export to more developed countries. This protected smaller developing countries like Bangladesh by limiting the amount of exports coming out of larger, faster growing countries like China. Think of it like this. So before this arrangement, let's say China was exporting 1 million textiles per year and Bangladesh is exporting 5,000 textiles per year. So this arrangement puts limits so that every country can now export 100,000 textiles per year, let's say. So for China, this is a huge decrease, but for Bangladesh, this is actually a huge increase. So now the playing field is much more level. It allows Bangladesh to fill the need in the market and develop their industry a lot more, and it prevents China from growing too quickly. This also protects the more developed countries like the US and the EU by putting limits on how much they can import, so they have to fill the leftover need in the textile industry with domestically made products. Right before the end of the multi-fiber arrangement, in 1994, we see the rollout of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. This is a policy that affects all industries, not just fashion, and it's a free trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico that was passed by Clinton in the US in 1994. What is free trade? Free trade between countries is when they do not apply tariffs to imports or subsidies to exports. Basically, in other words, they're not taxing imports and the government isn't supporting or boosting certain exports. It's all natural and based on the market. So how did this policy affect the US? On one hand, the GDP, which is the net value of goods and services produced in the country, increased, and a lot of new jobs were created. On the other hand, over 600,000 manufacturing jobs were lost with US factories moving to countries with lower wages, Mexico, and it's argued that this contributes to wage stagnation in the US. So how was Mexico impacted by this policy? Well, they reduced debt, built federal reserves, and stabilized inflation, but many ideals promised to Mexicans did not come true. They expected US and Mexican wages to converge, which of course did not happen. Poverty levels remained the same, and with the US agricultural industry being heavily subsidized, over 2 million small-scale Mexican farmers were out of work, so they turned to illegal immigration into the US. And how did this policy affect Canada? Well, they heavily increased imports and exports, mostly with the US, and they now rely on the US for 75% of their exports. We got them in a freaking chokehold. From 1995 to 2004, we see the Agreement on Textiles and Clothing, or the ATC. You remember that pesky multi-fiber arrangement that protected the domestic labor markets and put caps on manufacturing behemoths like China, right? Yeah, that's done. This agreement was their 10-year plan to phase out the MFA and to put an end to all the quotas imposed under it. The MFA was considered protectionist, which goes against the policy of the New World Trade Organization, or the WTO, which was established in 1995 and encourages free trade and open borders. A protectionist economy is considered bad because it's supposedly good for local producers but bad consumers because they may be getting an inferior product and prices may be higher if they're limited to their local market. So, how do you guys think this affected the US? Well, we started importing a lot more textiles. From 2004 to 2005, we see a value surge in the industry of 50%. Major factory shutdowns in Canada caused some companies to move manufacturers to countries with cheaper labor like China, Bangladesh, and Mexico. Forever 21 opened in 1984, but in 2005, they purchased an existing mall company called Gadzooks and expanded to over 400 stores. Over the next 2 years, their sales grew by almost 50%, and they continued to grow until 2015. One of my favorite stores of all time, Shein, opened in China in 2008. Another little mom and pop you might have heard of, Amazon.com, seems to have benefited from these policy changes. In November of 2002, they started selling clothing, which has since become a critical part of their business model. And of course, we see the last dying breaths of the textile industry in the US. Here's a graph that shows employment in apparel manufacturing and component industries in the US from 1990 to 2011, which lines up pretty nicely with the end of the MFA. It's worth mentioning that NAFTA no longer exists. It was replaced by the USMCA, which is the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, in 2020. This new agreement is largely the same, as it's still a free trade agreement between these countries, but mostly it seeks to bolster the US auto industry, so I'm not going to get into it. It's hard to draw any real causal conclusions from these policies, but I think it's safe to say that these policies paved the way for the explosion of the fast fashion industry, as well as absolutely killing the textile industry in the US, as well as a lot of other manufacturing jobs in the US. But I think the one thing we did get out of this is we did heavily increase our consumption of cheaply made goods. And that's a good thing. I guess this is a good time to mention that I have a BS in psychology, which doesn't really matter, but I guess I'm kind of mentioning it to give myself some credibility here as we dive into this section. As I was doing this research, I wanted to explore what role psychology plays in our consumption behavior, and here's what I found. People who value material goods highly report higher levels of stress and unhappiness when their materialism does not align with their means or income. Interestingly enough, people with poor home environments tend to be more materialistic. Research suggests that when people grow up in unfortunate social situations where they're not treated very nicely by their parents, or when they experience poverty or even the threat of death, they become more materialistic as a way to adapt. Okay, so there's this theory proposed by Leon Festinger in 1954 that argues that we compare ourselves to others in order to judge if we are good enough in our abilities, if we are correct in our opinions, and to set a benchmark for what we are able to achieve. This is called the social comparison theory. There are two kinds of social comparisons, upward and downward. Upward is when we compare ourselves to people who we perceive as being better off than us, and downward is when we compare ourselves to people we perceive as being worse off than us. For example, if I compare my running ability to an Olympic athlete, I feel slow and unsuccessful, but if I compare myself to a 10-year-old, then I feel like a god. When your upward comparison is positive, it can make you feel hope and inspiration, like, gosh, I hope someday I'm as great of a singer as JoJo Siwa. But when your comparison is negative, it can make you feel envy and dissatisfaction, like, I'm so disheartened I'll never make a song as great as JoJo Siwa's Karma. Downward comparisons, when viewed positively, can make you feel gratitude, like, I'm so grateful that my drawing skills have improved so much since I was a kid. But when viewed negatively, it can make you feel scorn, like, my 8-year-old niece's drawing of a hand turkey makes me sick. It looks nothing like a turkey. When we're constantly comparing ourselves to others who have more than us or who have things that we want, it can be really easy to fall into this trap of dismay or feeling like we're not doing enough or we're doing something wrong, or if only we could get a few more things, then we might finally be at the level that we need to be at. Let's talk about retail therapy. You ever go wander around Target after a really tough day, or treat yourself to an online shopping spree after finishing a really difficult task? According to an article by Psychology Today, more than half of Americans admit to engaging in retail therapy, or shopping as a way of making yourself feel better. They give 5 reasons why people may engage in retail therapy and what positive benefits they may get out of it. Number 1 is easing transitions. This would be like having a baby, getting married, or moving. Buying the right things can make you feel more prepared for this next phase of your life. Number 2 is dressing for success. Taking on a new job or responsibility and getting a wardrobe that makes you feel confident can make you feel more prepared. Number 3 is the pleasure boost of creativity and aesthetics. This is going shopping and dressing as a means of creative expression. Number 4 is relaxation and escape. This is shopping as an excuse to take a break from some of the stresses of life. They talk about a mom needing a break from her hectic household and just getting some alone time by going shopping. And number 5 is social connection. This is shopping as an excuse to spend time with your friends or to get to know someone new. They encourage shopping in moderation like alcohol consumption. However, they warn that if you start avoiding credit card or bank statements, lying or hiding purchases, missing work, school, or other obligations to go shopping, and feeling shame, guilt, or irritability associated with shopping, that you might have a problem and it might be time to seek professional help. I also wonder, from an evolutionary psychology perspective, if there is some level of our hundreds of thousands of years of living as hunter-gatherers that drives us to acquire goods. Imagine an early human seeing the wealth of resources we have at our disposal. They would almost certainly be driven to hoarding. Like, if you let Lucy loose at a golden corral, she would probably be guarding the chocolate fountain with a spear in one hand and the host's severed head in the other. I guess this is a good time to mention that I also have a master's in marketing, which doesn't really mean anything except that I've heard them teach these concepts firsthand. These 2 degrees are surprisingly complementary. Marketers are distinctly aware of the psychology of consumer behavior, and they are not afraid to weaponize the latest research to manipulate consumers. I want to go through this article from Cadence International, a market research company. They've worked with Samsung, Mitsubishi, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, Unilever, and many other companies, and they are just one of many such marketing firms. They frame the use of these principles and techniques as a way to develop insights that create a powerful relationship between the brand and the consumer. Some of the psychological principles and techniques they recommend utilizing include Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This principle says that human beings have a hierarchy of needs that need to be met. Some of the needs are more important than others, and the most important ones have to be addressed before we can move on to addressing the less important ones. They use this principle to align with consumers' values and beliefs to convince them that their needs are being met. Think, women will be attracted to me if I shave my face with a Gillette razor. Being attracted to women or having a partner might be very important in someone's hierarchy of needs. Loss aversion. This is the idea that we are more likely to avoid losses than to seek gains. They use this to highlight all the ways you might be losing if you don't purchase a certain product. Think using a VPN because you're afraid of losing your privacy. Endowment effect. This is the idea that consumers place higher value on things they already own or things they believe may be unique. Marketers can use scarcity or exclusivity to drive sales. Think like a Supreme drop or unboxing a Sunny Angel. Some marketers will use EEG and fMRI. These techniques are part of the field of neuromarketing, where they will show you certain marketing stimuli and measure responses in your brain. This helps marketers learn which parts of an ad are most eye-catching and what emotional centers in your brain are being activated. They also encourage the use of emotional triggers and appealing to your desires and aspirations as a way of making you feel more connected to the product. The point of this section is to show you that advertisers and marketers know what they're doing to you. They are not selling you a product they made because they think you might want it. They are selling you a fantasy that appeals so deeply to you because they have studied the inner workings of your mind and they know exactly how to manipulate you. This is why people get nervous about having their data stored by companies like Google, because they know everything about you and they can manipulate you into participating in behaviors you may not have normally participated in. They don't care about you. They don't care if their product works or if you like it or if it kills people. They just want to make a sale. Micro-trends, clean girl aesthetic, indie sleaze, blueberry milk nails, water talk, buccal fat removal, hunter eyes, quiet luxury, Ozempic. Do you guys see a trend here? What the fuck does any of this shit even mean? And I know half of these are such dead trends, you're probably rolling your eyes, but I can't help this sinking feeling that I will never catch up. That whenever I discover a trend, it's already too late. I've missed my chance to be cool and hip, and now I just look like I'm trying too hard. It makes me feel like I should be spending even more time on social media so that for once I can be at the forefront instead of bringing up the rear. It's the commodification and trendification of our bodies and our lifestyles with one common goal: consumption. We are always seeking more, better, different. If you type hashtag skinny into the TikTok search, it will return hundreds of results of women either rejoicing or lamenting that skinny is trending again in Hollywood. Both our joy and our misery completely out of our control and at the mercy of our wise and benevolent trendsetters. I know, it's bleak. It's like finding a jar of all of your baby teeth in your mom's nightstand and realizing that not only is the tooth fairy not real, but your mom is a freak. Social media is to fast fashion what Ariana Grande is to Cynthia Erivo. They become so thoroughly intertwined that they're basically lovers. Before social media reached the fever pitch that it is today, you had to go to a store in person or at least navigate to their website if you wanted to make a purchase. Now, you simply open TikTok, where you'll find thousands of creators posting shopping hauls. You'll find a whole tab dedicated to shopping, and on average, 1 in every 5 to 10 posts is a TikTok shop with a direct link. Instagram is littered with ads, and they even toyed with a shop page for a while. Facebook is a complete cesspool. It seems the primary role of social media has shifted from staying connected to being valuable ad space. Gone are the days of thinking for even a moment before making a purchase. Advertisers have finally succeeded in their decades-long mission to put as little resistance between you and making a sale as possible. 30 years ago, they would show you an ad on TV and hope and pray that that ad would convince you to get off the couch, get in your car, drive to the store, and make a purchase. And if you didn't or couldn't immediately mobilize, they were banking on you remembering or caring enough to act in the future. Now, there's no friction they have to overcome to get you mobilized. They don't have to worry that you might forget about the product, or decide you don't need it, or that you can't afford it. All you have to do is click a link, and let's be real, your address is probably auto-filled from previous purchases, your card is already on file with Apple Pay. All you really have to do is double tap. You could be shown an ad and make a purchase to completion in under a minute. On one hand, this is great for small businesses looking to grow their brand organically. This is one of the things that I really love about social media, is getting to interact with these small and super creative businesses. On the other hand, it makes it easy for influencers to make a quick buck by plugging their Amazon storefronts or shilling for a brand. Of course, I don't think all brand deals are bad, but you guys know those influencers who just can't or won't say no to anything? DraftKings, Fashion Nova, Honey? It's clear that they don't care at all about the product they're selling, and it's not something they would ever use themselves, but they have no problem boosting it to their impressionable audience that trusts them. And of course, we do trust them. You might say to yourself, who would ever take advice from Tana Mojo or Trisha Paytas about anything? And to that I would say, there's at least a couple 100,000 people who are interested in what they have to say. And if you're willing to trust them with dating advice, then you're more than likely willing to trust them with something as benign as what kind of bidet or butt plug to buy. And if Tana Mojo says that sports betting is super slay boots diva, then you might just download DraftKings code Tana. Now, I don't know if that's a code that even exists, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about these girls, but I do think this speaks to the power that influencers have. They might think they're just making a quick buck when they talk about their sponsorships, and they might assume that their audience can discern what they would or would not use, but that's a big assumption, and the truth is, people aren't really thinking that much. And if they don't feel like hassling with getting themselves a brand deal or making their own product, that's totally fine. They simply set up an Amazon storefront full of products they recommend, make a social post linking back to their storefront, and then they wait for you to do all of the hard work of actually buying the product. These Amazon influencers can make between 1 to 20% commission from these referrals. Amazon Games makes the highest commission at 20%, and Luxury Beauty makes the second highest commission at 10%. What? They can make that much money off their Amazon storefront? And they're highly incentivized to advertise things like games and luxury beauty? But I thought the Amazon storefront was the one thing I could trust. I know, it's shocking. Realizing the things you love can hurt you the most. Like your first time getting food poisoning from the all-you-can-eat oysters at the Raw Bar. How could I have known this would happen? All this to say that influencers need to be more aware of how valuable their endorsements are, and to think about what kind of products they're actually willing to put their name behind. Assuming they actually care about their fan base, of course. We just need to be a little bit more intentional and a little bit more mindful about our engagement with social media trends and influencers because, y'all, we're about to get into the consequences of our actions. Yeah. Oh no, we're getting into the scary sections. I promise there's only 2, but they're not gonna be much fun. Unless you like to learn. Then you might have fun. Or, if you just like the sound of my voice. Hey. First up, let's talk about greenwashing. Greenwashing is when companies make intentionally misleading claims about how much they're doing to protect the environment. This can manifest in a variety of ways. Claiming to be on track to reducing emissions when they have no plan in place, being purposefully vague, which goes hand in hand with using terms like green and eco-friendly, which have no standard definitions, implying that a minor change has a more major impact, or bragging about doing the bare minimum industry requirements as if they're exceeding the standard, claiming to avoid illegal or unethical practices that have nothing to do with the product they're making, and communicating the benefits of a product while neglecting to mention the impact of the company's practices on a whole, or vice versa. Wow, that sounds awesome. Surely most companies wouldn't do such a thing, right? Right? Wrong. Here's just a few companies who have committed such crimes. Volkswagen admitted to cheating emissions tests. They claim to be low emissions and eco-friendly while faking emissions tests and emitting 40 times the allowed limit of nitrogen oxide pollutants. Exxon advertised that its experimental algae biofuel could someday reduce transport emissions while they have absolutely zero goals or metrics in place to put that into action. Coca-Cola claims to have a plan to get every bottle back by 2030 so that none of it ends up in the ocean. Meanwhile, they are the largest plastic polluter in the world. IKEA demolished the UK's most sustainable supermarket to put in their own most sustainable store. And of course, H&M, Zara, and Uniqlo, just to name a few, have all been accused of greenwashing. In 2019, H&M started a conscious line using buzzwords like sustainable, green, and environmentally friendly without any clear definitions. Also, even if this one clothing line was green, it neglects the impact of the colossal amount of garments they produce every year and all their other clothing lines that are not green. Perfect segue. At this point, you guys know I'm obsessed with fast fashion. Yes, this video is about consumerism on the whole, but it's about fast fashion. So let's talk about it. How bad can it really be? I know this section is very facts and numbers heavy, but bear with me here as we dive into a little bit more facts and numbers, okay? Cotton is an incredibly thirsty crop. In order to produce one cotton t-shirt, it takes about 700 gallons of water. And in order to produce one pair of jeans, it takes about 2,000 gallons of water. Cotton that is not organic uses an incredibly high amount of pesticides, and this mostly hurts the farmers. Impoverished farmers in India are forced to spray pesticides for the pay of about €2. I don't know if this is €2 per hour or €2 a day, but regardless, this is an incredibly low wage for this kind of dangerous labor. These kinds of pesticides cause around 200,000 deaths worldwide every year and are linked to cancer, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases, hormone disruption, developmental disorders, and sterility. Textile dyeing is the world's second largest polluter of waterways because water left over from dyeing is often dumped into ditches, rivers, and streams. It dries up and pollutes our water sources while 85% of textiles go into the landfill every year. We are destroying our water sources for products that ultimately go unused. Guys, I don't want to get too on my soapbox here, but I cannot communicate just how bad polluting our waterways is. That's where my dogs drink from. You wouldn't want them to drink polluted water, would you? 35% of all microplastics come from washing synthetic textiles like polyester. This one is truly awesome. In 2018, Burberry was caught destroying $36.8 million of unsold inventory. Yes, it seems that when these companies massively overproduce stock, which they always do, they either burn it or send it to the landfill. Since 2020, many countries have become outlawing this practice, which is good, but instead of these companies producing less product, they just send all their overstock to thrift stores, so now the thrift store's stock is completely overrun with all of the dregs of the year's fast fashion fails. I don't know about you, but when I go thrifting, I'm looking for the kind of piece that screams, a 90-year-old woman died in this, not Shein dead stock. Dead? Wow, that's so awesome, and I'm so excited to have heard that news. I'm scared to ask, but how much clothing is being created? Surely it can't be. Forever 21. One Forever 21 worker can produce up to 700 shirts per day? What? And they use almost 100% synthetic fibers. Shein. Shein adds at least 500 new products to their website every day, and they sell 36 million pounds of goods globally per year. Zara. Zara puts out 12,000 new designs and manufactures more than 450 million clothing items per year. And that colossal volume of garments H&M produces every year, oh, that's only about 3 billion items. Oh, and I don't know if you saw the Danny Gonzalez or the Climate Town videos about what Amazon does with returns, but yeah, those aren't safe either. Most big companies don't box back up your returns and put them back on sale. They send them straight to the landfill. Unopened MacBook Pros, baby formula, and butt plugs, all dreaming of coming home with you, but destined for a trash heap. I could go into a lot more granular detail about the environmental impact of fast fashion, but I think this is a good overview of how atrocious this level of consumption is and how unsustainable. Now, let's circle back to something that seems to go hand in hand with environmental destruction, which is... I cut my hair. How does this even happen anyway? Well, when the industry grows at a rate that is faster than the policy, we see companies abusing unethical labor practices as a way to increase their production while keeping costs low. This also gives companies the money, power, and incentive to lobby against policies that will benefit their laborers. We all know this is how fast fashion is made, but I think a lot of us like to take this kind of out of sight, out of mind approach, like, surely it can't be that bad, right? It's 2025, we're better than this, right? If we want to understand the present, we have to examine the past. In 1911, the most dangerous factory fire in US history took place at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. This factory employed almost entirely teenage immigrant girls who spoke no English and worked 12 hours every single day, no weekends. The owners of this factory, Max Blanc and Isaac Harris, had a history of burning down their factories to collect on insurance. That's not what happened here, but that is the reason why they didn't have fire safety measures in place, like a sprinkler system or working fire extinguishers. Additionally, they only had one functional elevator and one functional stairwell exit, as their other stairwell exit they kept locked from the outside. You can imagine that when a fire broke out in this building, it became a disaster. The one functional elevator broke after just 4 trips, with everyone inside plummeting to their deaths. And the one functional stairwell opened in, which you can imagine is not an ideal design when you have hundreds of people fleeing a building. 146 people were killed. This tragedy led to major reforms in the garment industry and the organization of labor unions. Conditions continued to improve for workers in the industry until 1970, when the average hourly wage for textile dyeing and finishing workers reached a whopping $2.59 per hour in the US, which is almost double the minimum wage in 1970 of $1.60 an hour. At this point, the industry decided to take a page out of Henry Ford's book and started offshoring jobs to countries with much looser labor regulations and lower costs. We washed our hands of the whole affair and we enjoyed our blissful out of sight, out of mind mentality. We turned a blind eye as the garment industry disappeared from the US, and we cheered as the multi-fiber arrangement was phased out, along with the rest of US garment jobs. Our ignorance was truly bliss until 2013, when we were faced with the harsh reality of the Rana Plaza collapse. Bangladesh is the second largest apparel exporter behind China, and Rana Plaza was a factory located in Bangladesh. The building was shoddily erected on top of a filled-in pond. Initially, it was meant to be used as a retail space, but they turned it into a manufacturing space and added on multiple floors without proper authorization. Major government oversight and corruption led to the dangerous conditions that caused this factory to collapse. On the day before the incident, cracks were noticed in the ground floor, and the buildings located on that floor evacuated, but the garment workers that were on higher floors felt immense pressure to come to work anyway. In the following day, the building collapsed with thousands of workers inside. 1,100 people, mostly women, died, and 2,500 people were injured. This is a major failing on the side of the local government, but do the companies that use this factory also have some sort of moral obligation to ensure that the laborers are treated fairly? Call me crazy, but I say absolutely yes. I am pro-worker, I'm pro-human, I'm always gonna be on the side of the human. I don't care if it's expensive or difficult, do your fucking job. Just like those women who show up at that factory every single day and bust their ass. So, what did they do? Later that year, the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh was signed by over 200 brands and helped to ensure the safety and proper inspection of factories in Bangladesh. It allowed employees to report safety hazards and protected them against retaliation from their employers. Shockingly, North American giants such as Gap, Macy's, Walmart, and Target refused to sign the agreement. They instead created their own less rigorous organization called the Alliance for Bangladesh Workers' Safety. These two agreements unfortunately only addressed about half of the factories operating in Bangladesh and were made weaker by having two competing organizations instead of showing a united front. It's important to note that this is a $42.6 billion industry in Bangladesh and accounts for 82% of the country's total export revenue. With that kind of money, you would think it would be easy to make worker wages and safety a priority, but this is something workers continue to have to fight for. Now, this is just a small microcosm of a case study on safety. One factory in one country. Let's speedrun all of the rest of the unethical labor practices that garment workers face. Low wages. Even after the factory collapse in Bangladesh, they may be taking safety more seriously, but low wages do not seem to be a concern. In 2019, protesters were met with fire hoses, tear gas, and rubber bullets in response to pleas for better wages. The fast fashion industry employs over 75 million workers, while only 2% make a living wage. Fast fashion workers are routinely exposed to synthetic chemicals that are known to cause cancer. In 2019, the largest clothing manufacturer in India, a factory in Bangalore, was found brutally beating their employees who dared to attempt to unionize. Even though the factory hasn't taken any steps to address this issue, brands like American Eagle, Gap, Inditex, Zara, Puma, and many more continue to work with them. And of course, sexual violence. You just can't have a factory full of women working ungodly hours and unsafe working conditions whose livelihoods depend on their jobs without a little bit of sexual violence. Am I right? In 2019, it was found that 43% of women interviewed who worked in Vietnamese factories have reported being groped, harassed, assaulted, or raped, with many reporting threats of contract termination. When I see a number like 43%, it makes me wonder how many of these victims are too afraid to speak up. And if this is happening in Vietnam, it makes me wonder where else this kind of violence against women is happening. I don't want to beat a dead horse here with the "you're bad and you should feel bad" of it all, but I do think it's important to take a moment to really acknowledge the pain and the fear and the suffering that the women in this industry face every single day. For many women in these countries, they have no other choice but to accept these incredibly low-paying and dangerous positions. Wow, thanks a lot, Gina. Now I feel worse than Fry after he ate that truck stop egg salad sandwich, but before he got super buff. No? Okay, worse than SpongeBob and Patrick after they realized their mustaches were just kelp, but before they realized the power was inside of them the whole time. You guys got that one, right? But it's not your fault. Sure, we're all complicit in a broken system, but obviously you are not the problem. We have been manipulated so thoroughly, it's almost impossible to see the other side. It's like how they hire food scientists to make taking a bite of a Dorito more euphoric than graduating with my master's degree. Corporations are the problem. Advertisers, policy, a whole system designed around growth at all costs is the problem. It is such a Herculean task to solve the true problem. Maybe it's more policy, like the multi-fiber arrangement, that puts a cap on how much we can import from these countries that make incredibly cheap products. Maybe it's putting very high fines on these companies that have tons of leftover stock at the end of the season, like H&M and Zara, to prevent the donating and the dumping and the burning of all of the unsold product. Maybe it's more stringent laws on the selling of our data so we can't be advertised to in such manipulative ways. There is, of course, so much to be done for the unethical labor practices and the environmental impact, but that's above my pay grade. There are policies in place to address some of these concerns, but there's a lot left to be desired in the enforcement of these policies. That being said, let's talk about what we can do on an individual level. First, I want to talk specifically about fashion. What can I do as a fashion girly? Well, if we're going to shop, let's try to shop more ethically. I mean that specifically in the sense of environmental impact and labor practices. How can you tell if a brand uses good business practices? If a company has so many items on their website that it would be almost impossible to get through them in a reasonable amount of time, it's pretty safe to assume that they're not using ethical business practices. Usually brands that do are proud of it, and they'll have a section on their website where they detail exactly what it is that they do. They'll be specific and use transparent language. They won't be intentionally vague and confusing. Here's some examples of that intentionally vague and confusing language. On Nike's website, they flaunt their move to zero, meaning zero carbon and zero waste. They plan to reduce their carbon emissions to zero by shifting to only using factories that use 100% renewable energy sources. Wow, that is so interesting. So interesting, in fact, that I think it might be impossible for a company the size of Nike. And even if they could shift all of their facilities to being 100% renewable, it neglects a lot of those facts we just learned in the last two sections. Like that cotton is a very thirsty crop, or polyester blends are incredibly toxic, or even all of the carbon emissions from the planes, boats, and trucks that haul their merchandise all over the world. As of 2023, their Chinese factories had replaced 75% of their energy with renewable energy. Far from 100% carbon-free, but a good start, I suppose. I'll give them till the end of the year. Also, their mission statement on sustainability says, "We all share the responsibility for our playground, planet Earth." That's why we're reimagining things top to bottom through sustainability and circularity. We're focusing on carbon, water, waste, and chemistry, aiming to hit all targets by 2025. I don't know what any of that means, but sounds like they've got it all figured out. One of Amazon's extremely vague and confusing claims about sustainability is that they'll be using generative AI to address the climate crisis, which is also so interesting because AI is horrible for the environment. AI requires the use of rare earth elements that are mined in destructive ways. Data centers produce electronic hazardous waste like mercury and lead. AI-related infrastructure requires an immense amount of water for construction and cooling, and AI just uses a ton of energy. One request on ChatGPT uses 10 times the electricity of a Google search. And how do they get this energy? From fossil fuels, of course, but go off Amazon, you use that AI to solve the climate crisis. These are just some examples of what kind of language to look for. It's the kind of statements that make your head hurt while you're reading them, and so you just give up and kind of assume that if it sounds smart, they must be doing something right. Now, here are some examples of brands that I love that use transparent language and also create some really amazing products. First, we have Big Bud Press, which is an LA-based company that makes super chic and well-made basics. They claim to visit every arm of their manufacturing at least once a week and often daily to ensure that ethics are maintained. They do not work with sweatshops and they audit their factories every 90 days. They only use fabrics made in the US and almost 100% of their fabrics are made of recycled yarns. Fashion Brand Company is another LA-based company that makes these really cool, artsy, weird pieces. They have a factory that operates out of China, and if you navigate to their about page, they will tell you that their factory is WRAP certified, and in their factory they provide 6 months of maternity leave, 25 annual holidays, bonuses, pensions, health insurance, and pay 40% above minimum wage. They also have an extensive section about their initiatives to offset their environmental impact, like working with recycled fabrics and organic dyes, and an in-house scrap recycling program. If he wanted to, he would. Now I want to talk more conceptually about how you can improve your relationship with fashion and shopping. Emma Chamberlain just put out this video where she talks about how she started making money and she just became addicted to shopping and buying new stuff. She would go through her closet regularly just to get rid of stuff to make room for more stuff. She says that she thought that having more things would make her more fashionable, but instead she stunted herself by not developing her own personal style. So here's some of the ideas that I thought were useful from this video. Go shopping as a way to get inspiration for how to style the clothes that you already own. Pare your wardrobe down to a capsule wardrobe, meaning a small wardrobe full of items that can be mixed and matched in a variety of ways to make many outfits. And only buy something when it's perfect. This one is really hard, but I do think it would save us a lot of heartache and waste when we're buying these clothing items that are almost right, almost perfect, they almost fit, they're almost the thing we were looking for, but it doesn't really scratch the itch, and then you're still looking. Circling back to the capsule wardrobe idea, one of the most important things to me about fashion or having a personal style is being inspired by a look and then figuring out how you can make that look your own. Like if you see this crazy Charlie XCX outfit and you're like, oh my god, I want to do that look. So you go to the store and you just buy that exact look, then you're kind of robbing yourself of the joy and the struggle of making the outfit your own. And if you don't have anything that looks remotely like that, then it's probably not even your style, and you'll probably only wear it that one time. Instead, figure out how you can make a look that is inspired, but still your own. This one is a really fun and easy way, I think, to get more mileage out of your wardrobe. I live in New York City, so I get actual seasons, brag, but I have a very small closet. So at the change of the seasons, I do this thing where I take all of my clothes from that season. Like at the end of the spring, I take my tank tops, my sundresses, I fold them up, I put them in a box in my closet, and I pull all my sweaters and my jackets out. And it makes my wardrobe feel totally fresh and new again without actually having to buy anything new, because I kind of forget about all that stuff that I'm keeping in storage for 6 months. So it totally refreshes your whole wardrobe. You don't have to spend any money. Not to say that I'm not buying new stuff, because I am. I'm not perfect here. I am part of the problem, but this is just one really easy way to make your wardrobe feel like new again. Finally, save up a little bit of money and shop small. Small businesses, small artists, small creators you find on Instagram. Go to craft fairs. Generally, small businesses are pretty ethical. They might not be ethically sourcing their materials, but they're creating such a small volume of product compared to like H&M's 3 billion that the impact is negligible. And there's usually a really small team making the products, so the labor is also ethical. The more you interact with these kinds of businesses on social media, the easier they'll be to find. Here are some of my favorites off the top of my head. This one is called Falconary or Falconry, and they create these stunning chainmail pieces. My Poor Purse makes these really sweet, inclusive dresses and uses a lot of scrap fabrics. And PK Ceramics creates these incredible works of clay art. And I know that shopping from small businesses, I just have to say, I know that shopping from small businesses can be more expensive, and that's like a big reason why people don't want to shop small. They go to the price and they're like, oh my god, $100 for a dress, I can't spend $100 on a dress. But a lot of these small businesses do really amazing sales if you just keep up with the brand. Like Fashion Brand Company will do a Black Friday sale every year. If you follow them on Instagram, they'll post sales on their Instagram stories, they'll post discount codes. They have a whole sale section on their website. If you look at Big Bud Press, a couple times a year they'll do what they call a sample sale, where you get like a random color piece for like probably half off the original price, and they do Black Friday sales and they have a sale section. So if you're smart about engaging with these businesses, you can still find stuff for really good prices. Okay, now let's talk in a greater sense about what we can do about the issue of consumerism, the compulsive need to shop and buy and prove your worth through the collection of goods. The best way to get out of yourself is to get into your community. Free activities. Literally type free activities to do in my city Reddit into Google and you'll find a variety of interesting free community events that you can participate in. Spend your money on experiences, especially investing in local community and businesses. If money isn't an issue for you, take a pottery class, do a wine tasting, go to a climbing gym or a yoga studio or a community theater production of Dolly Parton's 9 to 5. The benefit you'll get from participating in real-life, tangible activities will far outweigh the joy of the acquisition of stuff. Our goal here is better, not perfect. Sometimes you're gonna buy sneakers from Nike. Sometimes you're gonna spend $12 on a bento box from Amazon that you'll never use. No, not even once. And sometimes you're gonna need to buy vampire teeth and a cowboy hat from Spirit Halloween for your Vampire Chaperone Halloween costume. But if you reduce your consumption from 5 new clothing items every month to 2, then I think that's a fucking win. If you choose to thrift or shop small or find new ways to wear something you already own, or save up your money to buy something really classic and timeless and beautiful instead of something super trendy, then I think that's a fucking win. And if you start to see your value as an individual in society as more than your next purchase, then I think that's a fucking win. You are so much more than a consumer. You are a living, breathing entity with thoughts and dreams and goals. You have the capacity to create as much as you have the capacity to consume. Make art, even if it's bad, it doesn't matter. Put yourself out there, enjoy your life. Bask in the sensation of the wind against your cheeks as you take your dog for a walk on an early fall morning. Listen to the sound of the quiet stream in the woods behind your house. Watch the sunset. Take a free class. Write in your diary, borrow a book from a friend, and actually read it. Your existence lasts for a mere moment. It is absolutely imperative that you do everything in your power to make it mean something to you.
The trees, they are singing to the tune of a song, and the wind is gently ringing the bell that brings the morning, the welcome of the dawn.